to which Regent replies that he is trying to save the world. Then he captures Morales far away from the place his friends were fighting, knocks him down with an explosion, and takes him to the super prison. When Spider-Man and Iron Man hear its sound, they stop fighting and realize that Morales is absent. On reaching the place where the explosion took place, they get baffled after finding the pieces of Morales' Spider-Man costume and start searching for him. Regent's friend tells him that this man, Morales, is a member of the Avengers and they must be coming here anytime, looking for him. But Regent tells him to let them come as he would do anything to keep the world safe. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel.
Welcome to Superior Spider-Man: The Complete Story. So who is Superior Spider-Man, and how does he differ from the Amazing Spider-Man? Well, back in the last story arc of Amazing Spider-Man leading up to issue 700, Dr. Octopus had finally gotten one over on Spider-Man. He'd actually swapped bodies with Peter Parker, and then left Parker to die in his broken and aging body. While his original plan was to go crazy on Parker's life and kill everyone and be a villain, Parker actually managed to reimplant his own memories back into his own body, currently being controlled by Dr. Octopus. What this did was give us the evil mastermind of Dr. Octopus and all of the memories that made Peter Parker a superhero, and all of this inside of Peter Parker's Spider-Man body. Realizing everything that Peter Parker has gone through in his entire life, Dr. Octopus makes a new plan. He's gonna defeat Spider-Man by being a better Spider-Man, a superior Spider-Man, and this brings us to issue 1 of Superior Spider-Man. Things begin with this new Spider-Man already showing himself off to be more superior by putting away the Sinister Six finally. And we also learn a few things about the interesting arrangement of Mind Swap that Dr. Octopus has made. He is able to access the memories from Peter Parker's life at will, and the remaining memories of Peter Parker have basically become a Blue Jedi ghost version of Peter Parker who is vowing to get his life back. Dr. Octopus isn't aware that Peter Parker is still there, but while accessing some of Parker's memories, he does manage to give himself Parker's love for Mary Jane mistakenly. Now, Dr. Octopus sees this on-again, off-again relationship with Mary Jane as a weakness that has been holding Peter Parker back this whole time. Octavia severs all ties with her, something Peter Parker probably should have done a long time ago. Otto then takes Spider-Man on an even darker path as he feels that the constant cycle of capturing a villain just so they can escape isn't going to end well. The first thing he does is brutally beat down Vulture after failing to convince him to give up crime. He even manages to blind him. Then he decides he can't be patrolling every day, so he makes spider bots to watch the city while he goes back to school to complete his doctorate. While going back to school, he begins to start a relationship with Anne-Marie Marconi, his tutor. While the spider bots do make Spider-Man's job just a tad bit easier, the Green Goblin makes a very, very silent return, and he makes it so that the spider bots cannot see anybody in a goblin mask. So, he can now move unseen throughout all of New York City, and he slowly starts to build the Goblin army. But I don't know if you're seeing a trend here. For every good thing he does for Peter, such as ending the Mary Jane thing and getting his doctorate, he follows it up with normal baddie stuff, such as chasing down and publicly executing supervillains and then brutally beating up the pranksters Jester and Screwball. Due to how brutal he's becoming, the Avengers call him in for questioning, but they fail to find out that Octavius has swapped bodies, though they are seeing that something is off. Then, in a situation that gets even worse for Parker, Otto finds him and uses one of his old brain devices to go back into his own head and erase everything that he doesn't need from Parker's old memories. This effectively removes Peter Parker from his own head. Following this, Otto Octavius
What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so with Superior Spider-Man, we're going to cheat a little bit. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that like the first three, really the first story arc is technically 3 issues, but we're going to cover the first 5. Now, the reason being because of the fact that it'll allow us a little bit of leeway later on down the line when it comes to like one-shots and so on and so forth. Something else that I also want to specify here is that it's well known by now, at least by most comic book readers, that the Spider-Verse storyline takes place during Superior Spider-Man. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do this. If I'm going to simply stop Superior Spider-Man once we get to that point, and then cover all the stuff we need going into Spider-Verse, or if I'm just going to cover Superior Spider-Man and then wrap back around and go into Spider-Verse. The only problem with that is that if we were to cover all of Superior Spider-Man and then cover Spider-Verse, towards the end of the Superior Spider-Man event, Dr. Octopus references Spider-Verse. So he'd literally be referencing an event that we haven't covered yet, or at least that I don't think we've covered very well. I did them before, but I didn't really like the way those videos were done before. So I'll get that figured out. I mean, we've got a little while. We've got, 20 some odd issues before we have to worry about that, but I think that, with regards to this little tidbit right here, what Dan Slott does is actually make Superior Spider-Man wildly interesting. And if I'm going to be dangerous, I would say that I think Superior Spider-Man, I think Dr. Octopus is a better Spider-Man than Peter Parker. The reason why is just because really his ingenuity, how he just kind of revamps the spider suit and little things that he does on the side to kind of make his life a little bit easier, stuff that just Spider-Man just never did. And what this does is it actually kind of allows Dan Slott to tinker around with the Spider-Man mythos. It's almost like taking Peter Parker and throwing him into some, pocket universe and then just experimenting with stories. Using Dr. Octopus allows Dan Slott to introduce ideas to the Spider-Man mythos, and then if people like it, he'll just keep it going forward once Peter Parker returns. And so because of this, one of the things that was established in Amazing Spider-Man number 700, really a landmark issue in and of itself, it was a beautifully written story. It established the idea that instead of us as the reader expecting Dr. Octopus to become Spider-Man and just be a bad guy, instead he becomes a good guy. But the way that he does it is a little questionable, and that's one of the reasons why I like it. With regards to this, it's basically a reformed version of the Sinister Six that's composed of a handful of individuals, like Overdrive and, Shocker and so on and so forth, the Living Brain, different things like that. But it's kind of funny because we could kind of look at this and say that it's like a poor man's Sinister Six. Like it's nowhere near as great as, the Sinister Six that we're used to as it's led by Dr. Octopus. And even, Dr. Octopus is Spider-Man, we're just going to call him Spider-Man just for the sake of this. But even Spider-Man comments on that. You could almost imagine him saying, back in my day, the Sinister Six was actually a deadly group. You guys are just goofballs. You guys are nonsensical. But the funny thing is that in the middle of fighting them, he actually bails off because for his first major fight as Spider-Man, he's going against a group of 6 people, all of whom have some pretty interesting and unique powers that, range anywhere from, throwing razor sharp boomerangs all the way up to, the ability to administer massive amounts of electricity in terms of a shock. And so because of this, what ends up happening here is Spider-Man actually kind of dodges for a little bit, bobs and weaves, and they all basically make their escape. But in the process, he actually damages Overdrive with his, some little claws or something that he attached to his fingers. Now, on the surface, it seems like something totally irrelevant, and Dan Slott treats it that way. And in fact, what we end up doing is we actually just kind of switch over to Horizon Labs. And the reason why is because the Living Brain was basically defeated by, by Spider-Man, by Superior Spider-Man, and then turned around and taken back to Horizon Labs. Now, the reason why this matters is because of the fact that for those of you guys who have been reading all new, all different Amazing Spider-Man, you'll notice Dr. Octopus in the body of the Living Brain. Now, the Living Brain goes back quite some time in the Spider-Man mythos, but he was always just a small time thing. It was a robot that was created, eventually went awry, and that was it. I mean, that's really all there is to the whole history history of the living brain, this is probably the most significant role that its character has ever played in the history of the Spider-Man mythos. But with regards to Superior Spider-Man taking the living brain, this is Dan Slott setting the stage for the return of Dr. Octopus in the body of the living brain with all new, all different Amazing Spider-Man. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say Dan Slott had this all planned out ahead of time, but I would say that it was more of like a fail-safe, that if, his stories took him in a direction where the bodies were switched back and Doc Ock lost his own body or something like that, he could come back in the form of the living brain, basically put his mind inside the robot. But the fact remains here that switching back over to Superior Spider-Man and following him further, what Dan Slott does is he takes all of this in phases. That's really what it is. It's just step by step. Now, initially, and one of the things that we had noticed, Superior Spider-Man had been paying special attention to Mary Jane Watson as anybody would if she were actually real. And because of this, Dan Slott was kind of toying with the idea, maybe Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson will end up getting back together. Now, in truth, if you're a Peter Parker, Mary Jane Watson fan, Superior Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson is just not the same. It's not equal. They're not on par. It's like kissing your husband's twin as opposed to your actual husband or wife or whatever the case may be. It's just not the same thing. It looks the same, it feels the same, but it's not. And so because of that, one of the other things that Superior Spider-Man comments on is, of course, the view of Mary Jane Watson, everything between the waist and the neck. So that's the nicest way I know how to put it. But the cool thing about this, and one of the reasons why I really like Superior Spider-Man, is because of what he tells her. During their conversations, when they're kind of going back and forth and they're talking about the Sinister Six and, where Superior Spider-Man's kind of making the moves on Mary Jane Watson, what he says is that where he had slashed at Overdrive, instead of just scratching him, what he had done is he installed a ton of nanobots inside of him so that he'd be able to trace their location and overhear their conversations. And that's why I say this is so cool, because you wouldn't really see this in a Spider-Man story. And so it's just kind of revolutionizing, and it's really like updating Peter Parker for the modern times. And there are a lot of people who will say, well, no, he doesn't need to be updated. He needs to keep living in the 1960s. No, I mean, seeing him updated here, I think is actually pretty stellar. Seeing new tools that are used, new implementations, different things like that are actually pretty interesting in terms of how it unfolds. And so because of this, he knows exactly where the Sinister Six are going to strike. He knows what tactics they're going to use. He knows where they're going to enter the building from, all that kind of good stuff. And so because of this, as soon as he encounters the Sinister Six the second time, he has everything put in place in order to make sure that he can basically win, to make sure that he can take out every single one of them. And that's exactly what he does. I mean, he basically just defeats them all. And so because of that, what ends up happening as the story or as the segment begins to wind up is we actually find out that Peter Parker, as we think of him, is not gone in his entirety. In fact, Peter Parker's still there. He's still in his body. The problem is that he exists in the subconscious. So all he can do is just watch the things and comment on the things that Superior Spider-Man is doing, but he can't actually interact with him. He can't actually talk to him directly. Now, the other half of this is that with regards to Superior Spider-Man conversing, with Mary Jane Watson again, continuing to try to keep the idea of this romance going, he's running into the same problem that Peter Parker always ran into, where he never had any time for his private life because he was always on patrol, because he was always out doing his own thing. And so what happens is Superior Spider-Man says, well, then let's take it a step further. I don't need to be everywhere. I just need to be able to see everywhere. And so what he does is he takes the concept behind his Octobots, which are these little robots that allow him to monitor things that are going around the city and carry out his own schemes, and he basically develops Spider-Bots. These are his